right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a good day today. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. So today, we're going to be covering a lot of material in Chapter 7. So if you'll think back to last Wednesday, we covered a lot of stuff in Chapter 7. We went through the lecture. We talked about different types of diagrams we may use. Today, we're going to be a little bit more specific. So what we're going to do today is go over several different things. So let's go ahead and start with a quick review. Who can tell me what an entity is? What is an entity? Jarek, what do you think an entity is? You got any ideas? Anyone have any ideas? So an entity is going to be a noun, and we want to collect attributes about the entities. So we have an entity. We can think of that as being a table inside of a database. If we had an entity for employee, we're going to have attributes that describe each employee. So with that in mind, we know that attributes kind of describe them. They're the fields that we would have within inside of a table. So in other words, we would have the actual columns within the database. Those are going to be our attributes that we're going to have. All right, so let's think about that in a little bit different. What do we call an instance? What is an instance? If I have an instance of an entity, what does that mean? Not exactly an idea. So an instance is going to be an occurrence of it. So it's like if you had a blueprint for a house. The blueprint in and of itself is not a house. But I could take that blueprint and I could build a whole neighborhood of identical houses. Those would each be instances of the blueprint. So when we're talking about this, it's going to be an actual occurrence of our actual entity. Then we also have a primary key. Hopefully someone can tell me what a primary key is. What is a primary key? Yeah, you're on the right track there, Jarek. So what it is it is an attribute that uniquely identifies each instance of the entity. So it's going to be unique to each record that we have within a specific table. Then we think about this in some other context. We have a foreign key. Now, what is a foreign key? I don't think we covered that too much last class. Anyone know what a foreign key is? Okay, so a foreign key is simply a primary key that's in a different table. So imagine I had the primary key student ID, and that's the primary key for the student table. Then if I use student ID for a registration, it's going to be the foreign key. It's going to be a foreign key inside of the registration table. And then lastly, what is a composite key? If I have a composite key, what does that mean? So not exactly. It actually is a primary key, but it's a specific type of primary key. It's a good guess, though. So not exactly that either. That's also a good guess, though. Any other ideas for what this is? Okay. So we have a composite key. It's a primary key that's comprised of multiple attributes. So for example, let's say we were going to use first name, last name, and date of birth as a primary key together. That forms a composite key. So we're using multiple attributes to form our primary key. That's a composite key. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk about different types of relationships we may see within inside of an ERD. So at the very basic level, we have here on the right side, there's a line going up and down. That's representing an entity. So basically, whatever is closer to the entity is going to be the maximum and whatever is further from the entity is going to be the minimum amount of the value that we have. Now, there's a word that we used last class where we describe the minimum, if something's required or not. What was that word that we used? Anyone remember that word that we used to describe the minimum, to tell if something is mandatory or optional? Do what? It does start with an M. It's modality. So certainly if we have something that is optional, its modality will be optional. That's going to be expressed by this 0. And then if we have something that is mandatory, it's going to be expressed by this line, which represents 1. Or we could also have something have n. So that n would just be represented by any integer we could think of. So I could have a minimum amount of occurrences in a relationship of 5 if it made business sense to do so. So we have lots of different options there. This is posted in Canvas, so make sure that you look through this and that you understand, some of the different ways we can represent these relationships. But what we see here is we see minimum and we see a maximum. So we have the minimum further from the entity and maximum is closer to the entity. Okay, so we have lots of different options. At the top, we have 0 to 1. So this relationship right here means that it's optional to have any occurrence of it, but there can only be one instance for a given relationship. So that's all this is representing. Basically, the main thing here is that we see the many-to-many relationship. We want to avoid any sort of many-to-many relationship. So many-to-many relationship means that we have many instances that are also associated with many instances. And that's a problem because it means we cannot uniquely identify each specific instance of the relationship. There's no singular primary key that corresponds with the instance. So to avoid that, we want to form an associative entity. Anyone remember how we make an associative entity? Yeah, so that's exactly how we did. So the book uses the notation of a plus sign to represent we're going to use the primary key from whatever is closest to that on that relationship. So that's certainly one nomenclature used. I tend to think that's a little bit confusing and not very clear as to how we would actually do it. So instead, I would recommend you simply make an associative entity. So you take the many-to-many, you just get rid of this relationship, you add in a new entity somewhere like right in here, and you just take the primary keys from the 2 entities, 2 or more entities that you're using, and use them as your new composite key. So that's pretty much kind of the basics here for a quick little review of last class. Let's go ahead and actually make some of these entities we're talking about. So I want to start off by making a relationship for an employee and a firm. So right off the bat, what do you think a good entity we could use for this could be? Just the first entity that pops into your mind. How about employee? Okay. And by the way, I'm going to be inside of Visio today. You can download it through, it used to be called Microsoft Imagine. It was something else before that. I think they've changed the name yet again. But if you search for Microsoft Imagine Mississippi State, you should be able to sign in and download Visio. Certainly something I'd recommend doing, but it's not required. So we have employee. Now we want to find a primary key for the employee. So can we just use employee ID? We can. So I'm just going to leave that as primary key. What else do we want to know about our employees? How about first name? F name, get last name, L name. Let's bring in some new attributes here. Because we want to get other information about our employees as well. For example, someone's working for you, you need to have their social security number. The IRS certainly requires that. There's lots of regulations kind of surrounding that, so certainly keep that in mind. Now, what are some additional things we need to know about phone? Yeah, so address is going to be an interesting one. If we want to do this simply, we could put address and call it a day. However, you can't really fit that inside of a single line. An address has things like, your street address, line 1, then you can have a line 2, maybe for, suite number, apartment number, something like that. Then you have city, state, all that information. So let's go ahead and do add line 1, add line 2 for address line 2. It's going to add in city. Let's go ahead and add in our good friend state. And lastly, zip code. That's exactly correct. Zip code. Okay, so we have information about our employee, but we want to see how do we best model the relationship that they have with their job. So with that in mind, what other information could we put in here? We want to have a new entity. We've got a good entity for employee. What's another entity we could put in to model the relationship between an employer and an employee? Department. That's a very good thing. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to call the entity department. We're going to use a nice singular noun. What would be the department's primary key, do you think? Okay, we could do department number. We could also do department name because hopefully department name will be unique. Let's go ahead and put in department name. Any other information we need for department? Anyone think of anything here? We probably don't need much else for department at this stage. Yeah, we could put location. Yeah, maybe like wherever their primary contact is, something like that. We could put that in here. All right, let's go ahead and add in a relationship between these two. So I'm just going to start off putting this relationship in. Now, we see here that right now employee belongs to one and only one department. Let me zoom in a little bit on that so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so right now we're saying that employee belongs to one and only one department. And we're saying that department has, so up here, we're at department has 0 to many employees. Is that okay? Should we change it any? What do you guys think? Can a department have 0 employees? There's really no right or wrong answer here. It depends on the business rules. Typically, we would probably want to have a minimum of 1 employee here, but there could be some exceptions. What if we're forming a new department and we don't have any employees yet? Would we still want to have information about the department? I think we could. So, we could leave this as is, or we could change it. So certainly, the cardinality for the most part is going to be determined by business rules. So it's not going to be determined by a lot of things. In the homework example, you'll kind of determine what makes sense, what is logical. There are no business rules given. Just make it something that is logical. Doesn't have any problems with it. So certainly keep that in mind. Okay, what else do we need? So we have employee, we have department. Do we have anything about employee pay? So what should our next entity be called, do you think? Salary? Okay. Now, does anyone have a different opinion on what this should be called? Well, we could call it salary. We certainly could. So what would the primary key be for salary? What do we call it? Sal ID. And then at some point we have to reference which employee this salary belongs to. So up here, what are we going to put here? Employee ID. That's exactly correct. So we have to reference it in some way. Now, with that in mind, what does that make employee ID inside the salary table? That's exactly correct. And it is a real pain to do a foreign key inside of Visio. So give me just a second here, guys. I apologize. You have to click in just the right spot. There we go. Okay, so we have foreign key. We have salary ID to uniquely identify each instance of salary. What do we need to have for salary? What do you think? Very good one. What should we call that? Okay, I like that. Charlie, right? Yeah, very good. What else do we need to know about the salary? What is another attribute we need? So let's think about that. That's a good point. So, different departments would have a budget for salaries. And different employees are going to belong to different departments. So in this example, we kept it nice and simple and said employee belongs to one and only one department. So with that in mind, if we have employee ID, we can then derive the department number from that employee ID. So I think in this case, we don't necessarily need the department information. Does that make sense? So because we're saying that the employee belongs to one and only one department. Now, if this were a one-to-many relationship, we said employee belongs to one, but they can belong to multiple, then we would. Does that make sense? So that's a great suggestion, though. What are we missing here? We're missing something kind of important. And I can't click inside that attribute, so I'm just going to add a new one. What do you think? Okay, we can certainly put that in here. So, deposit info. We can certainly put it in here for now. There's something that I think we're really missing, though. What is that? So we have salary. We have the ID of the salary. We have the employee ID. We have the pay schedule. We have the deposit info. How much do we deposit? That's exactly correct. So I'm just going to call this sal AMT for salary amount. Let's go ahead and form a relationship between salary and employee. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and it is not the easiest thing in the world to do this snapping with Visio. And I don't like where it put it because it's overlapping another one, so we're just going to move it. Yeah, this is not always the easiest thing in the world to do. So it's not going to be touching exactly. Well, it is. Okay. So we're saying right now that, let me zoom out so we can see this. We're saying that employee has one and only one salary, but a salary could belong to 0 to many employees. Is that correct? So if we have employee ID as a field within each of our instances of the salary, can we truly say that a salary belongs to multiple employees? I don't think we can. So let's go ahead and change this end symbol here. Okay, it's actually the begin symbol. So we're going to make this one and only one. Because if we have an employee ID, we will never have something that does not have an employee ID associated with it. So now let's go ahead and set the other symbol here, the end symbol, I guess. It's kind of difficult to determine. So can a person have more than one salary? Can you change salaries at some point? So that is going to, address some problems. It's going to introduce some problems. Let's go ahead and make this a one or more. Okay. So what this is saying right now is that employee has one to many salaries associated with them. But let's say that someone gets hired at $50,000 per year. So they have a salary ID. Let's just call it salary ID 1. Employee ID is also 1. Pay schedule, they are full-time benefits eligible. Deposit information, they have bank account number 1. And then their salary amount is $50,000. Well, because they're employee 1, they're doing a great job. You might say they're the #1 employee. So we give them a raise. we say, you no longer get that $50,000, we're going to bump you up to $60,000. So now there are going to be two instances of salary associated with that employee. So the employee ID is still going to be 1, as we said, but now all the other information is the same. Salary amount is going to change. So how can we make sure that's not going to be a problem? We don't want to pay them $110,000. We want to pay them $60,000. So how do we do that? Several ways. One of the ways we could do that is to do something like date in, and we could also do date end. Now, we could do it this way. We're going to talk about some other ways we could do this. But this is kind of the whole concept here, is that this is an iterative process. We're going to identify problems with our model. So as we go throughout this, the end result should be a well-formed, high-fidelity model. That's certainly the goal. All right. Any other information we need to know? How about position? Okay, so where should we put position? So we have an employee, we have a department, and we have a salary. Where does position go? We could put it beside department. So department has positions. Certainly something we could do. I'm just going to call this position title. What attributes do we need for position? Again, this is going to vary by business rules. Some organizations would have something like a minimum, like a pay scale. So maybe the pay scale for position is 18. And then you look at their pay scale table and you see, starting salary is this, mid-career salary is this, end-career salary is this, that sort of thing along a pay scale. Not all organizations do that. Should we do that in this case? Okay, we will. It's not a problem. So pay scale for the position. We're going to put department ID. So we're saying that department has the position. Like I said, it's not the easiest thing to get these relationships to line up like you'd like them to, but I think I'm doing all right. So we have a position title. And can a position belong to more than one department? In some cases it could, in some cases it could not. Some people say it could, so let's go ahead and make sure the position can belong to, let's go ahead and make this a one-to-many. So we're going to make this 1 or more instead of just 0 or more. Because if we have a position, some departments should use the position. Let's say we have a CEO position. That belonged to the leadership department. If we had a custodial position, that belonged to maybe building department or some sort of maintenance department, something like that. We would certainly have each and every position belonging to a department. There's not going to be a position that just doesn't have a department associated with it. Now we could see that if we had a business rule that said that that was the case, but in this example we're not going to have anything like that. Okay, so with that said, department has how many positions? Are they limited to having one and only one position? Probably not. So I agree with one-to-many. But what do we say about the one-to-many? Can we have a one-to-many? A many-to-many, rather. So we can't uniquely identify each instance. We have a department number, we have a position title. So what are we going to do? Let's add an associative entity that has stuff from both of these two. So we're just going to go ahead and completely remove this relationship. And we're going to call this department. And all we have to do for this associative entity here, we can just get the two primary keys from the entities that we're kind of using this for. So we have department number, we have position title. I think I spelled that correctly. And I'm just going to go ahead and move down this little line to separate this out from the other entities. I'm going to remove this attribute down here. We don't need it. I'm going to make sure. I'm going to try to set this as a primary key. So we have a composite primary key. Now, all we have to do is just bring a relationship from each to this, and we'll be good to go. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're just going to make a, whoops. Now, some of you guys may be thinking, well, this is a real pain with, Visio. Well, you guys should see my handwriting. Anyone ever take me for a 3233? Well, if you did, you probably saw that my handwriting is not very good. Yeah. Yeah, so I've taught that several times, and each time I try to write on the board, I always get all kinds of complaints. And it's understandable. I mean, I'm not good at handwriting. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So a department position is going to belong to one and only one department because we have a department number in there. How's that field is present? In fact, both of those are also primary keys. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and set both of those as foreign keys as well, because they're referencing department and position. So department number comes from department, position title comes from position. So that said, because department number is included as a primary key, it's going to be unique to one and only one department. Does everyone understand that so far? So we got that set to one to only one. But department can have one to many positions associated with it. So let's go ahead and set that to one to many. And again, it's not aligned perfectly, but we can see department has one to many department positions associated with it. Department position belongs to one and only one department. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing over here. So I'll give you a secret. You're always going to have the many be associated with the associative entity and the one-to-one associated with the thing that previously had the many-to-many. So let's go ahead and do that. So for our end symbol, it's going to be one or more. For our begin symbol here, it's going to be, whoops, not one or more. One and only one. Okay, because this department position has a position title, it's unique to each position, so therefore we're going to have that associated. This is one example here. We could do lots of things to kind of break this down, kind of get into some more kind of, I don't want to say strange cases, but probably some outliers, stuff that we wouldn't typically see in a normal circumstances. So any questions about this so far? And I'll make sure to post this online, so don't worry too much about anything associated with it. All right, any questions? All right, let's do another. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn the orientation into landscape so we can see a little better. Zoom into our good friend 100%. And let's go ahead and do a student information system. So if we're going to do a student information system, what sorts of things do we need? We need to know stuff about students. We need to know stuff about classes. We need to know stuff about possibly instructors. Anything else we need to know? Let's go ahead and start off with those good primary entities. We had student. We had course. And we had instructor. Let's just start nice and simple. So for student, what could the primary key be? Student ID. I like that a lot. In fact, let's zoom in just a little bit here. Is that good? Okay, so we have student ID. We're just going to get some F name, L name. What else do we need to know about students? Okay, date of birth, certainly good. Put DOB for that. We could also know stuff like, do what? Okay. Here for now. I'm not going to break down address. You know, if you were doing an actual database, if you were submitting this for a grade, you would break down, you know, first line address, second line address, city, state, zip. We're going to keep this pretty simple for now, just to make sure everyone understands. You couldn't actually submit this. This is not in its current form well-formed or high fidelity, but that's okay for now. So now we have course. So what should the primary key for course be? Now let's think about that. So if we have a course number, say 1101 or 1103, I guess, around here, is that going to be unique to any particular course? So I agree course number should be part of the primary key, but we also want to have subject. Because, you know, English 1101 is different from some other 1101 you guys would have to take. I'm pretty far removed from anything to do with advising, so don't come to me asking what you should take. I have no idea. But hopefully you all have somewhat of an idea. What else we need to know about courses? We have the subject, we have the course number. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that in for now. And anything else we should know? All right, so for instructor, I wonder if there's a way I could copy all these. I'm just going to change this from student to instructor. Give us a little bit of time here and change. All right, so let's go ahead and form some relationships between these entities. So student takes, how many courses you guys take? You guys only take one course? You take many courses, probably many courses. And of course, a course is taught by one instructor. Now, go ahead and make these symbols correct. So we have course has how many students minimum? We're going to have a course that doesn't have anyone in it. Not usually. So let's make this one or more. Now, for a student, how many courses must you take? You have to take at least one at some point. Is that fair to say? So we've got a many-to-many relationship here. Student takes one-to-many courses. Course is taken by one-to-many students. So we'll come back to that. Let's look at instructor. So we have instructor teaches 0 to many courses. That seems okay. Course is taught by one and only one instructor. So far we're in a pretty good spot here. So we have course being taught by one and only one person. Now what's the issue with this though? There's a really big issue that we have. Actually, a couple issues. One of the biggest issues though, instructor teaches 0 to 1 courses, but we don't have anything specific about when the course is taught. So I might have taught a class, you know, let's say spring of 2018, and then, you know, I might have taught a different class in fall of 2019. So we can certainly run into lots of issues like that, where, you know, there's a course being taught by multiple people. So the course would be taught by, actually, wouldn't be one-to-one, it would be one to more. And the reason for that is that we have a class like English 1101. We don't have one person who teaches that. We have lots of instructors who teach that. So in all actuality, the way this is set up right now, we don't have anything unique to when the class is taught. So let's go ahead and address that problem. So we have a many-to-many relationship here on both of these. So let's go ahead and add in our good friend, and let's just call it the section. So, we're going to get lots and lots of, well, we're just going to first address the course and instructor problem. So let's get the course num. Let's get the subject. Get the instructor ID. And let's also get the semester. So we'll get the semester. We'll get the year. Get the course location. Okay. So does everyone understand why we're doing this so far? Anyone lost? You got a question? They will. I was just putting them in for now. So basically, all of these are primary keys. So let me, like I said, it's not the easiest thing to set things as a primary key inside of Visio. But you're exactly right. A lot of these fields are going to be foreign keys as well. So we have course number and subject are both foreign keys as well as instructor ID. So let's just set all these as foreign key. Because these come from another table, or in this case, entity. So let's go ahead and form a relationship between section and what's this, course, and also between section and instructor. So for now, we're going to go ahead and get rid of this relationship right here because it's many to many. We don't want that. All right, so let's take a look at this. So right now, we're saying that course has 0 to many sections associated with it. Is there a problem with it being 0 to many? So it's going to have a minimum of 1. That's exactly correct, because we have part of the primary key is course number. So we have to have an instance of course number. So we're going to make this 1. Whoops, I just messed that up pretty badly. So this is going to be 1 or more. And then this other side up here is going to be 1 and only 1. Okay, so that's correct now. So section has 1 to many, or course rather, has 1 to many sections. Section belongs to 1 and only 1 course. Because we can't have a section of multiple courses at once. That doesn't make sense. You can't take 2 or 3 classes at once. So we have location. Let's also go ahead and add in time. Time of the course. So that's also going to be part of the primary key, because we could certainly offer multiple classes at the same location, but at different times. So to make sure we have a complete primary key here, that's what we're going to do. So let me just go ahead and set this as the primary key as well. So you could imagine a case in which maybe the English department has a lecture hall and they have 5 different English 1101 classes in a single semester. So that's something we'd want to address. So now at time, we are covered. The primary key is not going to have any repeated instances within it. Let's look at this other part here. So instructor teaches 0 to many sections. A section is taught by 1 and only 1 instructor. That makes a lot of sense here. So any given instructor will not necessarily be associated with a course. For example, there's research professors. Would they be teaching a class? Unlikely. So in this case, I think we're in a pretty good spot with this. Let's go ahead and address this many-to-many relationship. And let me silence my phone here. All right, sorry about that, guys. So first thing we're going to do with the many-to-many relationship, get rid of it. So now we have a student. Let's just talk about this before we do anything. Student takes how many sections? Student takes a lot of sections, many sections. Section is taken by many students as well. So we still have a problem here. So we're going to add in another entity. Now let's call this registration. Okay, so we're just going to add in a registration entity. And let's go ahead and add in the student ID. And let's just call this CRN for course registration number. We'll pretend it's the primary key for section, because we're going to keep it nice and simple. So we're going to set both of these as primary keys. We're also going to set them both as foreign keys because they're both referencing another table. All right, so now we just add in a relationship between these two, which is, like I say, easier said than done. Okay, there we go. And there we go. All right, so let's talk about this relationship now. So you have a registration where you're getting your student ID, which can be unique to one and only one student, and you have a course registration number, which will be unique to one and only one course. We're assuming that. So let's go ahead and then now add in some additional information here. So let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. Make sure we have our symbol correct. So for this begin symbol here, it's currently 0 to more. We want to make it 1 and only 1. And for the end symbol, we want it to be 1 or more. Because if you're a student, you must take at least one class. If you don't take a class, you're not a student. And then, of course, we have section, which, as we said, is going to have registration going to be associated with one and only one section. That's correct. But section will be associated with at least one registration, because if a section doesn't have anyone in it, is a section going to exist for very long? No, it won't. So that's going to be a 1 to many. All right. Now I think this is a pretty good spot. Can anyone see any other major problems with it? So again, students register for a class. A class is a section. Section is a course, and it is taught by an instructor. So that's just kind of overview there. Does this process make sense to everybody? Any questions I can address regarding it? All right. Well, that's really about all the time we have. I don't want to keep anyone, past 1:30 or anything like that. I'm certainly happy to address any questions if you guys have them. But apart from that, I hope you all have a great day. I will see you all Wednesday. So Wednesday, by the way, we'll pick up the review for the exam, which will be open from Thursday at noon all the way until Friday at midnight. So some people don't like Friday exams. I try to be accommodating where possible. So if you don't want to take the exam on Friday, take it on Thursday.